Hello, welcome back to Press TV's live coverage of the terrorist attacks that have happened in Paris. At this point, let's just give you an update. Again, some of these numbers are fluctuating up and down, but what we have is that media sources have indicated that around 150 people have been killed. That number has been revised down, according to some other media sources, to as low as 120. But many are reporting the number 150. And this was a result of a series of shootings, bombings, explosions, and hostage-taking situations that happened across Paris. 200 people injured, 80 of them are in critical condition, so that indicates that this number may rise. And altogether, this number also fluctuated from 7 to 8 attackers who have been involved, all as France states neutralized, which means they were killed. Reports indicating that they did have accomplices and they are at large. Of course, some other reports indicating that some of the attackers may also be at large. And the latest news that just came in is the fact that ISL has released. Okay, let's first go and listen to Federica Mogherini speaking right now and see what she's saying on this situation.
And feeling united with the conflicts that we have around our region, starting from this terrible war in Syria. So today we will try to not only lead and show leadership, show responsibility, and also trying to lead the way towards peace in a complete way.
Do you expect any further concrete steps forward?
Yes. I cannot anticipate that. I'll talk to you at the end of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the EU Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini live there from Vienna. The Vienna 2 talks, as it's called, is being held, and the subject is obviously going to be this attack that has happened in Paris, since that obviously is going to have an effect, as the Russian foreign minister said, on the itinerary of the talks in terms of a topic being discussed. Let's get some analysis on this story. Well, before that, let's first talk to our correspondent, Anastap Roy, to get an update. Anastap, we have a couple fluctuations on the numbers from the attackers to the number that have been killed. Tell us about that. And of course, the latest news that I'm looking at might be important is the Daesh terrorists have released a undated video saying that France will not live in peace as long as the bombing continues.
First, with regards to the numbers, here the French prosecutors are giving currently, as we speak, the number of 128 killed, 80 people seriously injured in emergency wards, and about another 180 to 200 who have suffered injuries. As far as the number of people who are the assailants, the killers who are, the question is how many are they? The current figure is 8 killed. Out of them, 1 person was killed by the French police. The others were reportedly suicide attackers. They blew themselves up, and that is causing problems for French prosecutors as they are unable to identify because the corpses of the attackers is so badly damaged. Then again, the other question of whether the ISIL has released a video and if it is dated, undated, or surely if it is ISIS, for that matter. The whole point is France in the past 2 months, starting October, has actually dealt serious blow to ISIS installations, particularly where apparently the French national members, French nationals, French citizens who were members of ISIS were actually involved. That is, petroleum bases, training camps. Those areas were badly attacked by the French aviation forces. It doesn't come as a surprise that it could be a tit for tat. However, these are initial reports. These remain to be confirmed. All observers here in France, particularly in French-speaking media, are saying that it's not really a surprise because France has carried out against the Daesh, and the Daesh wants to take revenge. And this is one of the first revenges. What we're also hearing is that some of the attackers have not been arrested yet. At the same time, what we also know is that the French authorities have closed the country's borders, meaning everyone who enters and leaves the countries, whether he's a European citizen or not, French citizen or not, will be scanned and checked before he can leave or enter the country. What we are also hearing is that American airlines have stopped their flights to France. So all in all, it looks like France is going through an unprecedented situation, as you rightly said. For the first time since the Second World War, we are seeing a new day in France, which is extremely catastrophic for the French.
Thank you for that. And this is Roy, correspondent there from Paris. Thanks for clarifying some of the numbers for us. Well, joining us for the analytical part of this live coverage, we have Ken O'Keefe, former U.S. Marine, who joins us in the studios here in the capital, Tehran, and Rodney Martin, who's a former U.S. congressional staffer, who joins us from L.A., Los Angeles. Thank you, gentlemen. Ken O'Keefe, I'll start with you. This should, I would think, be a warning signal to some of the countries supporting the terrorists in the war in Syria, in particular the U.S., Turkey, and Saudi Arabia.
Yes, well, I hope actually that it's even more of a wake-up call for us to realize that we are ISIS, that the Western governments that are in bed with Saudi Arabia, who is the primary funder of ISIS, along with Qatar and other Gulf states, we not only provide the political cover and military assistance to Saudi Arabia while it slaughters innocent people in Yemen, but we also provide the cover for them to go ahead and do their dirty dealing with these psychopaths who are running around Syria and other parts of the world as well, Iraq. Let us remember that before the United States invaded Iraq, there was no al-Qaeda in Iraq. Look at it today. Let us also remember that when Gaddafi was in power in Libya, there was very little al-Qaeda. And in fact, now we look at it, and it's an absolute basket case full of these operatives. And we look to Syria as well as yet another example of where these problems were actually quite under control in terms of al-Qaeda. In fact, Bashar al-Assad was assisting the United States, this is all on record, in a very meaningful way. In fact, many of the tortures that were being carried out were being done by Bashar al-Assad, or at least his regime, in order to extract information from people that we were supposedly fighting. I believe that it is beyond any doubt for any sensible person to realize that not only is the United States providing the financial cover, military cover, political cover for these terrorists through our proxies, but we've also, in pure technical sense, provided the training for these people in Jordan and Turkey. Another one of our best friends has been shuttling these psychopaths across the country from Turkey into Syria for a long time now. So the idea that the West is actually fighting a war against ISIS is beyond ridiculous. So what we really need to do is start realizing the fact that we are ISIS, and the reason why our corrupt, treasonous governments are carrying out these policies is because they do not represent us. They represent the bankers, and the bankers make a hell of a lot of money off of war. And more importantly, as long as we're all fighting each other, as long as we're all not trusting each other, as long as we're all simply being played as pawns over and over, then they can maintain this tyrannical system of never-ending war. So this is really the wake-up call. What has happened in Paris is us. We are responsible through our corrupt governments for all of these policies, and even if these individuals who carried this out are not directly working for Mossad, CIA, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, all the same thing, even if they did this organically of their own volition, believe me, that is exactly what our so-called governments want. That is what the policy that we've been fostering over and over. And quite frankly, if we're to look at ISIS, ISIS stands for Israeli Secret Intelligence Service. They never attack Israel, and that in itself also tells you a lot about who these individuals are.
Well, Rodney, Martin, perhaps some people might have thought and had doubts about any statements that are made regarding the Western support and some of the regional countries for these Daesh terrorists. But I'd like to get your reaction on the focus of this meeting prior to the announcement in Vienna, of which we just heard Foreign Policy Chief Federico Mogherini. And the focus was a warning that came from Iran and Russia that world powers that are going to be attending these talks need to compile a list of terrorist groups and, of course, then clarify the countries and which terrorist groups they're supporting in this war on Syria. That in itself is out of this world to try to figure out which countries are supporting what terrorist groups. So do you see then this being a link to what has happened in Paris, perhaps?
Well, first of all, let me say that I don't disagree with anything Mr. O'Keefe just said, but I think what was most important, well, and let me briefly comment on the situation of basically everybody naming, all the nations naming, basically Russia and Iran calling out the rest of the world, naming their bad guys and their boogeymen they've created, which now Russia and Iran and Syria are having to clean up. That's never, ever going to happen. And that's why consistently now in the Jewish and Zionist media in the United States, Russia has now been made a co-equal boogeyman and bad guy with ISIS and ISIL, which is the U.S.-created boogeyman. But what I think we need to be very careful with and watch very diligently that this event is not used to whip up Islamophobia, both in the West and especially in the United States. You'll have people in the United States saying, well, now, see, they attacked Paris, they're going to come over here next, and they're going to whip up anti-Islamic hysteria, and they're going to perpetuate this war on Islam. There was an attack in Paris. We don't have enough information right now to determine even if these, to determine anything, let alone if these attackers were even Muslim. We're hearing that they yelled Allah Akbar, but that anybody can develop a black ops and go in and create a problem, create an incident, so that they may create the co-equal solution. So I think we need to be very careful and not allow ourselves, meaning the public, get whipped up into hysteria like what happened in the preceding days after 9/11, and we see what a catastrophe in terms of national treasure in terms of human life in the Middle East, and the public policy since then as a result of that hysteria that was whipped up after 9/11 and the subsequent Islamophobia. Individuals carried out these attacks. We don't know anything about them yet, other than some witnesses said they heard them make some statements and they looked a certain way. And what we're hearing is that they were all neutralized and that their bodies are unidentifiable. There were 6 or 7 targets that were hit in a very, very methodical way. And this strikes me as being a special ops operation designed to create an incident to further an additional means. And so I think we really need to ask the right questions and not jump on the hysteria bandwagon at this point.
Well, some of the events there, Ken O'Keefe, that our guest Rodney Martin talks about in terms of Islamophobia being created again, or more policies to exercise against Muslims, well, maybe this is what the intent is behind these attacks. If there are any hands at play behind the scenes of some of the countries involved in this so-called war on terror.
Well, indeed, that's the case, and it's just more of the same now, isn't it? Now, I'm a non-Muslim, and I am angry at the way Muslims have been portrayed around the world. I have lived in Muslim lands, and I have experienced some of the greatest hospitality and generosity that you will ever experience, and yet Muslims in general are being associated with this monstrosity, this most recent monstrosity known as ISIS, which again I say is Israeli Secret Intelligence Service, and also Al-Qaeda previous to that, Al-Nusra Front. All of these things are intended to smear Islam as a whole, 1.8 billion people on this planet, to associate them with this sort of madness, when in fact it is us in the West that are creating this stuff, funding it, very much protecting it. In fact, America has been providing air cover to these psychopaths in Syria and Iraq largely, and we see that when Russia comes in and actually does something constructive, look how long many of these men are shaving their beards and running off with their heads, tails between their legs. It is really, really, really disgusting that people have been conned into thinking that Muslims have anything to do with this. And let us harken back to the original incident which has caused this madness known as the War on Terror. The so-called 19 hijackers in Osama bin Laden is one of the greatest fairy stories ever created. The idea that this man in a cave in Afghanistan on dialysis was masterminding this incredible operation in the United States with 19 so-called hijackers wielding box cutters, Mohammed Atta among them, snorting cocaine and hanging out with strippers in Florida, that these people are responsible for this event in defiance of the greatest military machine in the history of mankind, never mind all of the evidence that's come forward that makes the official version of 9/11 beyond ridiculous. Muslims did not carry out 9/11. In fact, those who blame the Muslims, primarily the Jewish supremacist Zionist-controlled media of America and the government which is controlled by these Jewish supremacist Zionists in America, all of them parrot the same ridiculous, tired old line that Muslims are responsible. And this is an agenda which is intended to create a clash of civilizations. And if we are smart as people, we're going to see the agenda for what it is, and we're going to realize that those who are collaborating in this agenda need to be held to account for literal war crimes and crimes against humanity. And I'm including in that not just the politicians in the military, but those in the media who have perpetuated these lies, because there is no way that they could possibly believe this nonsense. These people have literally sold their soul to the service of the devil.
Let's associate some of those points, Rodney Martin, with some of the points that are happening on the ground and see if there's any connection with the incident that has happened. We're looking at some major gains that have happened in the past 6 weeks. The Russian airstrikes along with the Syrian army making advances on the ground with the Iranians in their advisory role. We're looking at the gain that was made in Iraq just yesterday with this area by the name of Sinjar getting liberated. And again, some advances in terms of eradicating these Daesh terrorists. And then you have this incident happen. Do you think that there's